Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out for this Saturday night special event for the Bay Area Book Festival. My name is Sherilyn Parsons. I'm the founder and executive director of the festival. Thank you. And this festival is about radical hope. Yes, about radical hope using literature, which is a form that holds hope in its very essence, in the way that a writer connects to a reader, the way that a reader puts out a faith and trust in reading a text. That is an inherently hopeful act in allowing oneself, opening oneself to be changed. So this book festival is very much about hope. Around the time of the election, I didn't know that Carolina was feeling like, what's going to happen and how am I going to respond? But I certainly was feeling that way around planning this book festival. And I had, of course, committed to turn this festival largely into a response to what's happening in our country. And then it was announced in one of the publishing magazines, Publishers Weekly, that Carolina was coming out with a book called Radical Hope. And I thought that must be a main session of the festival. And we decided to make it our Saturday night special event because of incredible authors presenting, and the ideas, and of course the audience's commitment, I believe also, as you can see by coming tonight, to the idea of radical hope in a very challenging time. So we're so delighted you're here, and I'd like to introduce our editor and the moderator of the panel of this book, Radical Hope. Let me just read one sentence in here I forgot to mention. This is from Roxana Robinson's essay in this letter, in this book, and it says, "We feel rage when we feel separate. We feel compassion when we feel connected." And we're all here connecting together tonight. So thank you for that, and join me in welcoming Carolina.
It's a shared mic.
So I'll hold it and then pass it.
Okay. Everybody must, if you're speaking, you must talk.
Hi, good evening, everybody. How are you tonight? Sounding good, sounding great. It's fantastic to see you all. We're just starting to get settled into our seats. There's so many of us. This is 10 writers. Oh, is this musical chairs? No. There's a chair for everyone. Fantastic. So I'm going to introduce these incredible, truly phenomenal, peerless writers in a moment. I am so incredibly honored to share the stage with every single one of you. First, I just want to thank the Bay Area Book Festival and all of its leadership for its vision, its really peerless approach to creating and fomenting literary community and exchange. It is really something that is, I think, doing powerful things to the literary landscape. I also want to just say really briefly that this book was born 3 daes after the election, the Friday after. Does anyone remember the Friday after the election? Could you work? Because I couldn't. So I was sitting at my desk and, had already had so many conversations and reading social media and, the spike in hate crimes and so many different people's, grief and despair and looking in the eye, everything that was on the horizon that we were going to have to face, and thinking also about my daughter's words. My daughter's 4 years old, and she said about Trump, out of the blue, she said, "We're not beautiful to him." She's multiracial. She has 2 moms. "Nobody told me that," she said. "It's just a feeling I have." And so in thinking about, what are we going to do? All of us. What are people going to do, ordinary citizens? But also, what can we as writers do? What can we as artists, as those of us who tell stories, who shape narrative, who write books, who write articles, who strive to shape culture? What can we do? And so I started to invite writers to join me in what at the time was a very strange and nebulous idea, which was a book of love letters or epistolary essays about our current political times and the way forward. I was just incredibly moved and floored by the people who said yes. Some of you said yes that very day. You're incredible, thank you, and all of you are amazing. So I'm going to briefly introduce each of these writers so that you have some context for them, and then we are going to have an unprecedented and inimitable conversation. Because how could it not be? So we have, on the far end, we have Meredith Russo, who is the author of the young adult novel If I Was Your Girl. She hails from Chattanooga, Tennessee, where she yells about social justice and Japanese cartoons on social media. Then beside her we have Karen Joy Fowler, who is the author of the Karen Joy Fowler, who is the author of 9 works of fiction, including the New York Times bestseller, The Jane Austen Book Club, and the Man Booker Prize finalist, We Are All Completely Beside Ourselves. Welcome, Karen Joy Fowler. Next, we have Achio Bejas, who is the award-winning author of The Tower of the Antilles and Other Stories, which just came out. It's phenomenal. As well as the novels Ruins and Days of Awe. She currently serves as a distinguished visiting writer at Mills College, where she directs the MFA program in literary translation. Thank you for welcoming Achi. Aya de Leon is next up. She is a Berkeley institution. She teaches creative writing at UC Berkeley and is the author of the feminist heist novels Uptown Thief and The Boss. She is also at work on a social justice children's picture book series and a YA Black girl spy novel. Welcome, Aya. And flying in from the East Coast, we have Katie Kitamura, who is the author of Gone to the Forest, The Long Shot, and most recently, A Separation. She's the recipient of a Lannan Foundation Residency Fellowship and numerous other honors. Please welcome Katie. Parnaz Furutan is the author of The Girl from the Garden, and she has received fellowships and awards from Penn USA Emerging Voices, Hedgebrook, and the Elizabeth George Foundation, among other institutions. Please welcome Parnaz. Cherie Moraga is another institution. The Cherie Moraga is the co-author of This Bridge Called My... she's the co-editor of This Bridge Called My Back, Writings by Radical Women of Color with the late Gloria Anzaldúa. She is the author of a new literary memoir entitled The Native Country of a Heart, A Geography of Desire, and she teaches at Stanford University. Please welcome Cherie. Next we have Jeff Chang, who is the author So much love in this room. This is going to be fantastic. Jeff Chang is the author most recently of We Gon' Be All Right, Notes on Race and Resegregation, and has received an American Book Award among many other honors. He is the executive director of the Institute for Diversity in the Arts at Stanford University. Welcome, Jeff. And last but not least, we have Kate Schatz. She is the New York Times bestselling author of Rad American Women A to Z and Rad Women Worldwide. She's also a co-founder of Solidarity Sundays, a feminist activist group. If you haven't heard of them, check it out. And she lives with her family on the island of Alameda, California. So please welcome Kate Schatz and all of our writers. So I have so much to ask you. I have so much I want to hear from you, and I'm sure I'm not the only one in the room. Where I'd like to begin, for the first question, I'd like to make sure we all answer and kind of go around. And this by way of introducing, your work as well as your role in the book. There are 31 contributors to the book, counting me, which actually means pretty much a third of the book is on this stage tonight. Pretty incredible. So the theme of the book was epistolary essays, letter essays, in part in the spirit of James Baldwin's first essay in The Fire Next Time, addressed to his nephew, letter essays as being positioned to be able to blend the personal with the political. With that format being specific, I really wanted to be completely open to let you decide who you write your letter to. It could be an ancestor, it could be a whole community, it could be an invented person, it could be anything. And so my question for you is, how did you decide to whom to address your essay? To whom did you address it? And, what was that decision like for you? So we can begin here, and we're all going to speak into the mics.
When they told us to line up backstage, I went first because I'm a Virgo, and I was like, oh, it's time to line up. Okay, here I am. And then I realized that makes me go first, so great. I wrote a letter to white people because I want to be talking to white people. White people need to be talking to each other about race. So I wanted to talk about race, and I wanted to talk about whiteness. In particular, I wrote my letter to good white people, and then in the letter I say there's actually no such thing. What there are white people who work to do good, just things. So I wanted to address whiteness, and I feel like so often white people who want to talk about race do so without actually talking about whiteness. We talk about everyone else, but we don't talk about what it actually means to be white, especially in the context of this election. So I wrote to white people. See a lot of you out here tonight, so hey guys.
I guess. Okay.
There are 5 mics.
Okay. Good evening. And thank you so much, Carolina, for assembling all of us and asking us to be part of this amazing project. For me, I wrote to sort of a broad, sort of expansive kind of we, because I wanted to feel not so lonely, I think, in those days after the election. And I wanted to feel like I was part of something that was larger. And so I wrote to my friends, my family, folks I deeply love, folks I don't know, who have been part of these social movements for so many years, and maybe even just recently as well, to sort of say, hey, we're all in this together. We'll make it through.
I believe that I wrote it to the radically hopeful artist, and I love James Baldwin. I just love James Baldwin, and I feel like as a very young woman, when there was nothing to read as a Chicana and a lesbian, I read James Baldwin, and even before I knew he was queer, I knew he was queer, and so I wrote in that spirit, I think, because I feel like that ultimately, and I think after many years of teaching, having the privilege to teach artists, young artists, is that I really sort of believe on a certain level that it is their dissidence that is the only thing I trust, that is the dissidence of the artist, that the artist gets to be a dissident, even a dissident against progressive politics, which is what I feel is our mandate. And ultimately, I always say, because we don't have to footnote, and we don't have to follow a party line. So I think that's why I wrote that, to them.
I wrote the letter to my mother. There's a distinct memory I have from my childhood. I was about 6 years old, and we were walking this dark, long highway. We were refugees. And my mother carried a baby in one arm, and I was beside her on that road. I've carried that story for years, and I've tried to write it down for years, and each time it hasn't come out correctly. And in the more recent years, we have been witness to atrocities globally against children and women. We've seen horrible things. And when the idea that the US would close its doors, when America would close its doors, became a possibility, everything shattered. Because America is America. I know no other way of saying it. You know, that's the refuge and the hope. So I started writing that letter to my mother, and then I addressed it to all mothers who choose exile to save their children and themselves.
I was definitely not one of the people who wrote back in one day to say I could do this. I really hesitated a lot because I felt, and I don't know if anybody else here felt like this, I felt like I didn't have the words. I felt, in a way, I felt in the days after the election like I had no speech. And one of the reasons for that, I really think, is because of the degree to which Trump has degraded the English language. And as a writer, I think I'm sensitive to that, but I think it has such real world implications. I think when you say language has no meaning, that's when that's how you end up with fake news, and that's how you say something and you retract it endlessly. And so I wrote a letter to my daughter, who's now 1, but who was 6 months old at the time, and she was just at that stage where she was starting to say syllables and she was starting to acquire language. And watching her, I could see how I could see the kind of struggle and the fight to acquire language, and I thought, the importance of safeguarding language that has meaning for the next generation, felt like a very real need to me. So that's why I wrote the letter.
My essay is Dear Millennials, and I wrote to the millennial generation. And I run the Poetry for the People program at UC Berkeley, and so I'm surrounded by really passionate, earnest, political young adults, and was kind of with that community a bunch after the election, listening and talking, and also have young adults in my family that I'm really close to. And one of the reasons that I decided to write to that generation is many years ago, Bell Hooks talked about how, given the kinds of struggles there are in the Black community, that some people think, oh, what the Black community just needs is more patriarchy. Like, if we had more patriarchy, things would go better. And I felt like after the election, there was a parallel, like, what these millennials need is just for them to let us think for them. They need to let us boss them around. Like, that's clearly the solution. And there was a lot of scapegoating of the millennial generation. And it's not that I agree with every vote that every millennial cast, but that actually asking younger people to allow themselves to be more dominated by older people is never going to be the solution. And so that was sort of something that was rattling around in my head, and I said yes to Carolina, having no idea what I would say, but that was the one thing that I kept thinking that I could contribute, sort of an exploration of intergenerational understanding that had to do with really backing and empowering younger people instead of scapegoating and scolding them.
I wrote to other people in the resistance because a lot of us have been in the resistance for a long time. I feel like, as a little Cuban dyke growing up in a very, very Republican household, I've been in resistance since I was like 6. So I wrote thinking about the fact that we frequently forget our history and that it's so important to remember our history and to know other people's history, to understand our responsibility to one another, to be kind, to be generous, to give space, to understand that things will fail, but that from those failures there will be lessons that we can learn that are important, and that is what moves us forward, to keep learning, to keep being open, and to always hold each other up.
I think that I said yes very quickly to Carolina, and then realized only later that I had promised to provide hope, which I am not certain I managed to do. But I chose to write my letter to the water protectors at Standing Rock because I felt that they embodied everything that was now going to be necessary for all of the rest of us to do as well, that they had shown, they had left their homes and shown up in their actual physical bodies, that they had stayed for a long time, that they had been treated the way protesters are always treated, but that at the time that I wrote the letter, they were still there. And I felt, however hopeless I might feel, that as long as they were standing up, I could not sit down.
I want to say really quickly that as someone who just had her first book come out and is still sort of a neophyte in this career, and also as because trans women are still outside of some indie presses incredibly underrepresented in writing, and I come from a pretty poor, semi-rural working class background. If you had told me 2 years ago when I think I was running packages at an Amazon fulfillment center for 12 hours a day, if you told me that I would be here with a group of people that I'm kind of awestruck by as uniformly as this group, I would have thought you were crazy. So things aren't all terrible, I guess. I mean, they're going okay for me. They're going okay for me. But I wrote my letter to my son because, obviously trans women are always women. I feel like Berkeley is a place that will accept that as true, if not anywhere else. But there was a lived experience of the struggles of existing in public as a trans woman that made everything abstract at the time. And I, without giving any gory details, my son was conceived in one try the night that I started hormones. And my son is Jewish, and I am the pansexual trans woman mother of a Jewish child. And so I feel there was an awakening that moment that I found out he was going to be born, to kind of exactly how much a lot of people in the world want my weird little family gone. And then when Trump was elected, I was in Copenhagen, and I was very conscious that night that my son, who was in a lot of ways the key that opened the door to my real life, and who so many people would like to see gone from the earth, was more physically distant from me that night than he ever had been before. And so my relationship to my son really is the locus of all of my political resistance. And so that's why I chose to write it to him.
Yeah, thank you all so much. I mean, it was just, for me personally, it was these, as the essays started to pour in, I wonder what people are going to write. It was so profound. There's so much power and insight and brilliance and saber rattling and thought in them. They really nourished me greatly along the way. I felt buoyed by working on this book through the winter and early spring. And all of these, I should contextualize that all of these essays were composed in that very strange, eerie time between the election and the inauguration. Do you remember? That strange, eerie time between the dread and the sort of what is this going to look like. So people were really doing that work that artists do, of thinking, looking at the long horizon and looking forward and reflecting on what might be to come and what we might need in that time to come. So knowing that these are the essays that you created and produced in that time pre-inauguration. We're now post-inauguration. We're a few months into this administration. A thing or two have happened since then. So my next question for you, and I'm going to invite folks to kind of answer when and as you see fit, and we'll just sort of see how that goes. People can kind of jump in, and maybe you'll want to riff off of something that someone says. But my question for you is, sort of since then, what is it taking to stay sane, awake, and engaged in these times? How's that going? Meredith's got it. Meredith has a mic.
Radical self-care, which involves, for the most part, turning off MSNBC occasionally. I check in every other day or once every 3 days, but I feel like it's safe at this point to take it on faith that he is bad and bad things are happening. And so I will be sitting there and I'll be like, I should check in on things. And it's like, I might not know the specifics, but I know what's happening. And so I minimize the psychological torture of constant exposure to his horrible orange face. And just emphasis on family, chosen family, if that's what you need, and community building, and being present and caring for other people who are targets, rather than necessarily always focusing on the sort of constant antagonism and his just constant, just horrible face everywhere.
I just add, I think that's so critical in terms of self-care. And for me, I also think about metabolism, that I take in as much news as I can metabolize. And by metabolize, I mean I need to either be able to write about it, or I need to be able to take some kind of political action about it. And if I take in more than that, it's just more toxicity to the system than I can handle. And by keeping a low dose of news, then I'm able to metabolize and make it and make use of it. And so there's a lot of detail that I don't know, but I think that by sparing myself a certain level of detail, I'm able to continue moving forward, both as an activist and a writer.
Yeah. I just yesterday in my car said to myself out loud, alone in my car, I don't need to listen to NPR all the time. I am a news junkie and was long before this election. But I have been so what you guys are saying is resonating so much, and that I'm constantly absorbing it. In the past few weeks, that's been my big realization. Someone's going to tell me when the crazy shit really happens. And I put music on in the car, and it was really great. I recommend it. One thing I'd say, too, in terms of what does it take to stay engaged, for me, it actually doesn't take much, because everything is so constant and dire that I feel like I have no other choice. And I've made a commitment that this is the work that I'm doing right now. I'm allowing deadlines to slip. I have kind of created a new full-time job of activism, and I accept that. And so I often hear people asking about how do we prevent resistance fatigue? I'm like, well, they're really helping us. Trump is really helping us with that, because he's not giving us a break. And so I think that the key is the self-care, but it's not hard for me to stay engaged because I'm constantly enraged. And I didn't mean to rhyme that, but it sounded
But it makes a good T-shirt or bumper sticker or something.
Coming soon on a bumper.
I must have a sort of boundless, endless capacity for, masochism, because I actually continue to listen to the news. I find that I roll over in the morning. The first thing I do is I grab my phone and I check the headlines. I hear little nervous chuckles, because I know a lot of you are doing the same thing. But what I find that's been really important for me to do is to balance that with stuff that gives me hope and spirit and energy. And for me, historically, that has always been poetry. So I have turned more and more and more to poetry. Where once I just made a point of reading a minimum of one poem a day. Now I read 3 to 5. Because that's what, it's like when you play video and you need to shoot to refuel. I just need that many more poems to refuel. But that really seems to make a difference to me. And to turn to poets who really, speak to the moment, whether they were of this moment or not. People like Juliana Spar, and people, like Audre Lorde, and, perversely, Jose Marti, and some of these other older poets. I find that they really sing to my soul, and that makes a difference to me.
Yeah, I have hesitated with this question because I'm not sure that I have stayed sane. I also I had a conversation with my brother a couple months ago where he said, exactly how does it help the cause that within moments of every terrible thing that has happened. And I don't have a good answer for that, except that there were probably 4 developments in the 2 minutes of that conversation that he was completely unaware of because he was wasting his time scolding me. But I did do one thing that has been helpful. Several years ago, I had a dog die. I've had many dogs die in my life. This time I thought, I can't do this again. This is my last dog. I can't possibly go through this again. And then at a certain point in the election, I thought, I can't get through this without a dog. So I went to the pound and I brought home a dog, and she has to be walked 3 times a day. So 3 times a day, I'm not watching the news.
I feel as if I've existed in a state of outrage for a long time, even preceding this election. I would see something in a textbook and I would be outraged by it. An example, today I was walking outside among the booths and I came to this beautiful book of illustrated maps for children, and I have 2 little kids at home, and I thought, this would be the perfect gift to take for them. And I opened the map, I'm from Iran and their father's from Kosovo, and I opened the map to see if Iran is represented. And not only is Iran not anywhere in the book, but the Middle East is a total blank, save for Jordan. And Jordan, I know, a total blank in this time and age. I mean, when children need to know about the Middle East, it's a blank in this book of maps. And Jordan, the map has these cute little pictures on it of the cultures in these places, and there is camel racing. And yes, I'm outraged. There's camel racing, there's people with sandals, because that's all people in the Middle East wear sandals. Nobody wears heels, or sneakers for that matter. And I turned to the elderly gentleman. I said, am I seeing this right? Is there a table of contents? Am I just not understanding this correctly? And he looked at it, and he was also outraged. Now, this is an older white gentleman, but he shared that outrage with me. And it was a moment of connection between us. It felt good, because I always felt alone in my outrage. But I feel like right now there is this sort of communal outrage. It's nice.
I will say I feel like I've heard a lot of people of color say that since the election. Like, wow, more people are talking about it. There's sort of this unmasking of some of the deep, entrenched, and constant issues in some ways. There's more company. More people are talking about these issues. So I would like to talk about the role of literature, writing, art making, and culture making in these times. Its role in progressive movements, its role in resisting and moving forward. Achi, you started to speak to it a little bit as far as like poetry being one of the places that you go to fill your well, to ground, to stay sane and awake. And I see that Jeff's got his mic ready. Now you too are really gonna have to, because actually, Cheria, you wrote your letter to the radically hopeful artist, and so that was definitely something you were engaging with very much. And Jeff, I'm thinking about something you wrote in your book, Who We Be, where you say that cultural change always precedes political or legislative change. I'm paraphrasing, but the idea being that, when you think about civil rights that happen, often it's the artists first, who are sort of the prophets who frame it, who tell the stories, who shift the narrative, right? And possibly cost themselves, change the narrative, think about the story, make voices audible, visible within a culture, and then that allows legislative change to catch up. So I'm wondering if, since we do have so many artists on this stage and so many literary writers, if you have some thoughts about what is the role of art making and of culture in the resistance and in moving forward for progressive visions.
I think I know why Cherie passed the mic to me really quickly, and it means that I'm going to pass it right back to her after I'm done. But I think what we've seen, certainly in the circles that we work in and with our students, is that there's a huge desire right now for folks to be going inside and thinking about these types of questions and grappling with them in their art making. There's an explosion of folks on campus who want to make art at this particular moment. We've just seen that happen over the last 2 years, 3 years, really, with the sort of inflection point of all the social movements that we've seen, but I think especially since the election. And that art is seen as a healing practice, as a way for folks to be able to grapple with very deep types of traumas that are being brought up by this particular political moment, and to do it in a way that creates spaces for people to be able to come together and to be able to share their work. And I think that, Radical Hope as a book project in of itself is a perfect example of that kind of thing. I think that this is a moment that's rich with all kinds of rethinking at this particular moment, and I think that that's going to impact us for many, many years to come. And this is where I pass it to Shereen, who just had an amazing thing on Thursday.
I had a thing on Thursday. Well, I think that I'm still thinking, sister, about what you were saying of your own story, and how it is the site of your conciencia. It's the site of your consciousness. It has shaped you for the rest of your life. That's what I believe in. That's all I believe in. I believe that that we all there's a touchstone for everybody in this room where we weren't right, where we were other, and I think why I have always believed so much in women of color feminism is that by the sheer math of it, the possibilities of being other on many levels is in the body of women of color, and I include in that trans women of color. And I shouldn't have to say trans women of color. And so my sense of it is that in Spanish, que nuevas, what's new, that Trump, on some level, some days I'm grateful to him for the absolute physical manifestation of every aspect that has shaped my women of color feminism, because every aspect of his ignorance is somehow based on one of those places in terms of what his opinion, his absolute invisibility, his sense of non-existence of indigenous people. That's why he can support the Standing Rock and support the oil field, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. Okay, and on every single juncture, he represents everything that means that to ensure we're not free. This last thing around Paris, the Paris Agreement, is that que nuevas, are we going to fight for our planet or are we not? We see that somehow we have a very curious government in which this one individual can have that much power. How is that even possible? So questions of white patriarchy are made manifest at a level in my little pitiful life I never imagined. I grew up, to graduate from high school in 1970. You thought, man, we're going to have it our way. And to see that every single decade since then, it has gotten worse and worse and worse, and every freedom site has been taken from us until it's manifested in this man. So there's the man, and so that's our work. It's nothing new. It is just at a level more horrendous than ever. Do I believe in art? It's just what I said before. It is the dissidence that I believe in. I believe sometimes, I don't know about self-care. I'm just saying that. I don't know about self-care sometimes because I see my ancestors and I see how they worked with no sense politically or in their middle-class consciousness about self-care. I see that they suffered. I see that they sacrificed. I see that they had no rights. I don't think that the civil rights struggles that people thought about self-care when they were being beaten. Please do not misinterpret me to suggest that I don't believe we should take care of ourselves. Please do not misinterpret me. I hate language. Talking about language, I hate language. because you are so easily misinterpreted. But I think on a certain level, we have to kind of check that too, particularly in terms of class privilege. You know, I'm just saying that. So I think that's it. Put this thing back.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say one quick thing, which is that I think one thing that writers are good at is simply documentation, and I think being very attentive to the present moment is really important right now, because the minute shifts that are happening so rapidly, the minute as well as the very big shifts, are how things are being taken away from us. And I think one thing that I really love about this project is that it was done very quickly, and things have already changed so much. I mean, things are perhaps as bad as you thought, perhaps worse than you thought, but they are different. So, you know, I'm not living in the same world that I was when I wrote that, the essay for the book. And I think it's powerful because it's a document of that particular moment. And I think the more that we can kind of bear witness to what is happening around us, even in just the simplest of ways, writing down the small shifts. I mean, this is why I feel like I'm a news junkie, is because it's actually the things that are changing, that are being taken away. The details are really important to me. I write them down even if I don't know what to say about them. I write them down anyway so that I have a record of them, so that every day I know how the world has changed. So I don't wake up and find that really everything has been taken away. So
I think that's particularly important because this administration has a very special and unique power, which is that they somehow managed to make us forget the scandal that happened 3 days ago. You know, it's to me fascinating how, you know, we can be all up in arms about something and literally 3-4 days pass and there's so much more on the, you know, that's happened since then, that scandal that had us completely, you know, hanging off the chandelier of the building or whatever, you know, just it's gone. It's vanished. And I think bearing witness, especially for artists, is very important because we can catch that moment, even if something else has happened. Even, you know, if you know you're not paying attention for 3 or 4 days because you're focusing on that one thing. It's just so important. I mean, that's, I think, the power of literature, that it bears witness, that it asks questions, that it, you know, tells truths in ways that, you know, no history book ever can. That it really gets to what is going on and how we feel and how we're affected by these things.
I would just add that, you know, one of the things that has been of great concern, continual concern, is the fear that this will be normalized in some way. And I feel it's up to us to make sure that we keep reminding ourselves and everybody else that nothing about this is normal.
Yeah. You know, Parnaz, you talked about being outraged at textbooks, you know, and I think that when in creating books like this, it is a kind of textbook. I think so much about what will be written about this time in those textbooks 5, 10, 20 years. I was just doing research last week for a new book I'm writing about young women, and I was going back and rereading the story of Anne Frank, and I was reminded that, you know, in the second year of the annexation, of them being up in the annex, it was when she heard a radio broadcast of the Dutch, I think, Prime Minister asking the Dutch citizens to keep letters and diaries and documentation of their experiences so that they could have record of life during wartime and during the occupation. And it was when she heard that she decided to go back and rewrite her diaries and to do essentially a novelization. And so she started a novel, right? And this is probably familiar for a lot of people, but I had forgotten that detail of her story. And that she went back and rewrote everything. And it was, to her, it was to create it as literature. It was to novelize it. And she got almost all the way through before they were found and arrested. And that, when I read that, I thought about this book, and I thought about what it means to be recording and writing anything at this time, to have that as a document in the future.
Am I good? Do you want
Please do.
Go for time? Okay. To go back to World War II, because it kind of always in politics comes back to World War II. I live with pretty severe bipolar disorder, which means a lot of depression. So I tend to be prone to like incredibly fatalistic modes of thought, and I try to be vigilant to that. And a product of that is that I tend to think when it comes to art and politics, I can't help thinking that Berlin in the 1920s and the 1930s was one of the most artistically vibrant and productive cities in the world, and that no number of burlesque houses or satirists stopped the Fuhrer. And it makes me wonder, like, what do we need to do different? What do we need to do differently? Because I would rather Anne Frank had lived. And I think we need to interrogate as leftists. I think something that we've witnessed a lot in the Democratic Party, they're not necessarily artists, is a can you tell I'm a socialist? Is a tendency to believe that it's better to lose with grace than to get a dirty win. And I think that if our art is just telling truth to power, or just calling Trump a silly name, or is just satire, then that's not enough. We have to become incredibly instigatory. We have to instigate people. We have to be mean. We have to a certain extent, for all of our individual minorities, not just as women, be Sixus's laugh of the Medusa, cackling in the face of power and antagonizing them and putting fire into the hearts of people, rather than kind of stately debate where the truth will be found and justice will make itself known, because history shows it won't. And so it's time to fight unfair when it comes to art.
Yeah, this is perfect, because one of the things that I've been thinking about too as an artist is kind of like, who's my audience, right? And I think that one of the things that I believe that I was doing before the election, but I just feel even more strongly convicted about really figuring out how to speak to a multi-class audience with my work, right? And really figuring out, like, how do we have that conversation? Because as a writer and in literature, the class divides in literature are so strong and intense. You know, it's really strong and intense both in how things are kind of tracked within the industry, and then how the audiences are built and maintained, and what kind of books are for whom. And so I think for me, I've been for a while kind of developing this sort of stealth political messaging in kind of pulp fiction and, you know, the sexy beach read that's really like about radical wealth redistribution, or, you know, like that's been my thing. But really thinking, how do I even push that further to think about how do we message to folks who within the literary industry are expected to read stuff that are expected to be entertained only by literature that doesn't have a political agenda, and how do we actually create literature that's accessible to people across lots of differences.
Just noticing the themes in thinking about the role of art making and culture and literature and literary production, about documentation and about shifting the narrative and opening up and kind of exploding open in some cases, you know, who tells what story and how those stories are told and made space for in society. And that was one of the things that was really important to me with this book, was wanting to document, a documentation of sort of where we are, but also from multiple perspectives. So really wanted to strive to create a kaleidoscopic perspective, or to shift the metaphor really quickly, to not have a monolithic. I mean, I think that there is a place in the world for monolithic responses to Trump, for sort of, or to this administration, because it's not just about one man. Let's be real, right? I mean, the threat is not one single man. That is not the source of the attack, just this one guy. And I think it's important to remind ourselves of that. But in these times, and in our response to this current administration and the challenges that we're facing, to have a multivocal response, to not only have like a monolithic monovocal response, but that there is no single soloist that can fully capture the music of our times, of who we were this last winter, and who we are today, and who we see ourselves becoming. We can't only have soloists. We really need symphonies, you know, the symphonies of voices, and I really am hearing that in all of your responses so much tonight. in that vein, I'm wondering if there's anyone who'd be interested in talking about conversations. So we're having a conversation right now. All of the conversations you've been having over the last few months, is there anything that you can say about conversations you've had within your community or communities, however you define communities, or conversations you're having across communities or maybe across difference? Any conversations that have been particularly challenging or generative in our current times?
You know, immediately after the morning when we woke up and it was all, you know. Yeah, right. Like you had woken through and walked through a strange portal. I didn't know who I could talk to. I dropped my daughter off at school and I didn't know who was foe and who was ally. And I'm talking about people that I had daily contact with, people who taught my child. I didn't know if they saw her as the enemy. I didn't know if they saw my family as the enemy. It was a terrifying moment. I walked into Trader Joe's, you know, and I looked around me and I said, who here wants me and my family out of this country? Who can I look at? Who can I make eye contact with? It was a very strange day. And then, slowly, I feel like people started coming out of their stupor and there were whispers. Like, can you believe this? And when they whispered that, I thought, oh, good, we can talk about this. It was almost like a code. And then the whispers got a little bit louder and louder and louder, and then there were conversations. And those conversations, certainly, it was a relief to talk to people who were just as bewildered as I was. But I also started talking to people who had voted other than I had hoped, you know. And one particular conversation was with the grandmother of my preschooler's friend. And she said, you know, we were picking up our kids, and she said, you know, people just want to stick to their tribes, right? And you know, my first reaction was to bristle, you know. And then I had to pull in the reins and apply compassion and then find a strategy for discourse. And the strategy was this, there was this whole thing. I said, well, you know, in the face of the ecological disaster that's before us, wouldn't it be better if we all just sort of came together? And she agreed. And then we connected. So I think there is room for conversation across communities.
I found a very curious thing with this election, actually before the election. I'm used to being a real loner in my family in terms of how I vote. This was the first election without my mom, and that had always been a very, let's say, fruitful plane of conversation, you know. But so I found myself sort of looking for elders to talk to even before the election, and I was having a really tough time. You know, I talked to my aunt, my mom's sister, who has voted Republican her entire life before the election, and I was kind of, you know, I was all geared up, you know, I was ready, and she said, "Oh God, I'm not voting for Trump," and I was like, "What?" And she's like, well, I can't vote for Hillary, but I'm not voting for Trump. I'm writing in Jeb Bush. But you have to understand, this is a radical move for, you know, an 81-year-old Cuban woman who, you know, has been in this country 30 years and still doesn't speak English. You know, by choice. Porque no le da la gana, okay? So this was really interesting. So I called one of my cousins, and I'm like, Patricia, you know, what are your parents doing? Oh, they're voting for Hillary. I'm like, what? And again, lifelong Republicans who had never strayed outside, never even contemplated the possibility of voting for a Democrat. And I'm like, wait a minute, how did that happen? I said, my aunt's writing in Jeb Bush, which is going, well, my mom, is out of her mind. She doesn't remember what's going on from one minute to the next, and my dad's got dementia. I have no idea. I'm not asking any questions, And so this just happened to go just down the line. Every time I talked to some cousins or some elder, it was, holding out to be true that they had all sort of shifted with one exception. My tío Ivo, who had been a political prisoner in Cuba, and he died last night, actually. So this is sort of an appropriate conversation to sort of, he would love that I'm mentioning him. In Berkeley. In Berkeley. Eso no son tan los hippies. So my tío Ivo, the next morning, proceeded to decorate his Facebook page with like every pro-Trump, thing that you can possibly imagine. He was very excited about Trump. But a very interesting thing happened, which is that he did not engage with us. Beforehand, there would be all these crazy conversations on his page between, all the cousins and him. We were constantly challenging him. And suddenly, after the elections, he didn't engage with us. We would put up whatever we wanted. He didn't delete it. He was remaining provocative, still racist, still kind of vaguely homophobic, but careful. But he was letting us all sort of have our say, which I found to be amazing. I've nothing else. It just felt like my community, anyway, was moving in a way that was much closer to me and to my hopes. And it made me think that the next time, that little splotch of South Florida, which is always a great shame to me, might actually make me really proud.
Well, I wish I could say the same thing. I think there's a phenomenon that, there's two things I want to talk about, and I want to respond a little bit to what you were saying, but first I'll respond to what you just said. There's a really tragic phenomenon, I think, among some sectors of the Mexican-American community, and I say that not Chicano, I say Mexican-American community, which is that even with all of the horrible anti-Mexican rhetoric and action, the whole thing about the wall, some of the contractors that are putting in bids for that wall are Mexican-Americans. It is a great grief to many of us to realize, not only within our own families, which is the case, and it really is feelings like, I don't know if I can talk to them anymore. It's that intimate, especially when members of our family came in as undocumented people. This is crazy. This is the American dream, like the poison of it. Everybody's taken, the poison. And I'm not even going to call it lemonade. It is poison, So that, I just want to say that. That's really a hard thing for us to grapple with. And we're not talking about the first generation recién llegados, people that just came here. We're talking about people that have made a life here. And this kind of sense that somehow, not me, it's them, not me. And somehow that intimacy is so close, they have to say them, not us. No, it's not us. We are not Mexicanos together. So it's very tragic. The other thing I want to say is that the censorship, and I appreciate I keep talking back to what you say because it sparks my heart, that the censorship this time around, to me, is nothing like 9/11. So I'm like, connecting the dots, and I think partly that as political people, we need to keep connecting the dots. That to not have a flag out at 9/11, to not buy as an act of patriotism in 9/11, all of that thing about capitalism is our freedom after 9/11. Buy your car, make sure the dryer cleaners gets your work, keep the businesses open. All of that hysteria, I did gigs where I spoke up and spoke against that we were complicit in 9/11, and it had to be one of the scariest things I ever did. And I ain't all that. I mean, I'm saying that seriously. It's like that's kind of an obvious thing to me, that we are complicit. So this thing was weird because I feel like, no. This is just the end result of all of that. It was the end result of what happened then in 9/11. And we have to continue to not be fooled that this is something, again, que nuevas. This is not something new. And what is real censorship? When they tell you you're not a patriot because you critique your country. And it was much more subtle then than now.
Would anybody else like to speak to this? Yes, Meredith.
So who in the audience is from the South? Okay, so you guys all know that in the South there are certain kinds of conversations that are not had. And as a lifelong Southerner, I've been reworking a lot of that praxis, because even as a radical leftist Southerner, there's still a part of me that if religion comes up at the table, if religion or politics come up at the table, tends to like clinch up. Just like with this sort of proxy embarrassment that you get from watching a really potent episode of The Office. But I've been working on retooling my discourse in two very distinct ways for two very distinct groups. One group is people who should know better, and one group is people who have not necessarily had the chance to know better yet. I've had two kind of instructive conversations recently in that mode. Right after Trump was elected, anyone who I know in my life and had known for more than a week or two should know better. They're friends with a trans woman who has a Jewish son. Again, to come back to this little microcosm of like what to a Trump voter is the worst kind of thing. And they knew, they could not know that the threat that Trump's administration would represent to me and my family. And they know that I have friends that I have friends of African American descent. I have Latinx friends. I have Muslim friends. Like they know this. They know this for a fact that I have these people I care about, and they still prioritize political abstractions over the material safety of me, my son, and people I care about. And so, as people in the should know better category, I performed a quick, surgical and simultaneously brutal extraction of them from my life. Posted an explanation that was like, no, you have demonstrated that you do not love me and I do not want you in my life anymore. Snap gone. And a couple of people told me, you know, in a very Southern tradition, we're like, well, bless your heart anyway, but like, we just think you're being really unreasonable. And I was like, well, you know, I see your point, but block. And that created an environment where other very polite Southerners who might not have revealed to me the extent of their radical political leanings, because I had done that so publicly, came out and said, hey, actually that's pretty cool. Okay, yeah, like we can talk about this now. And the other is the group of people who maybe shouldn't know better. This is kind of a delicate topic. I've witnessed many Twitter wars between Bernie bros and Hillary stans, I guess is what we're calling them now, on what exactly we're supposed to be doing with the white working class, right? And I was sitting outside a bar smoking a couple of weeks ago, and a man came up and asked me for a cigarette. A man who, as someone who's from a working class Southern background, was very clearly from a working class Southern background, and looked like he'd fallen on hard times. And we were talking, and he told me about how he had been laid off from a factory. That segued into some pretty negative comments about, quote unquote illegals. And normally what you're supposed to do if you're a Southerner, if someone is saying these kinds of things that make you uncomfortable, because disagreeing would be kind of terminally rude, is to, like from King of the Hill, go, and like, and take a puff. But instead I looked at him and I said, well, first of all, they're just, like, it's hard to get here, right? They're doing something difficult to try to improve their lives and help their families. And he was like, well, I hadn't, was kind of dissembling. And then I explained to him that everything he'd ever been told about his hatred of this other kind of people, like every idea he'd ever been given was a largely intentional campaign that the wealthy had engaged in to try to divide all of the groups that could have presented a possible mode of resistance to him. I was basically quoting the Communist Manifesto. Like, I didn't say the only thing you have to lose is your chains. I didn't say workers of the world unite. But I stealth quoted the Communist Manifesto in a way that I knew would be palatable to him, and this was surprising to me as someone who has not always had a lot of faith in the convincibility of the other side. But it immediately became apparent that nobody had had this conversation with him before, and he nodded and flicked his cigarette and went, that makes a lot of sense, and seemed to have genuinely improved, and. So again, I think you have to make a clear division between people who should know better, who should be excised immediately, and never regarded except in mockery, and people who are wrong currently but might not know why, and they deserve the delicate touch of proper discourse.
I wanted to quickly recount one conversation I had recently. I was in Fresno for an event, and I had a little time to kill before I had to be at the talk. So I called an Uber. I had a stack of postcards to deliver to Devin Nunes. My hotel was near his office. So I called an Uber, and it showed up, and it was a huge Ford F-150 pickup truck with camo seat covers. And the guy just gestures for me to get in the front seat. And he had AM radio playing loudly, and he was, I had a big American flag, and I almost just clicked delete, but I didn't want to be charged $5 or whatever. So I got in, and I told him where I was going, and we sat awkwardly, and he asked me what I do. I said, I'm a writer. What do you write about? I write about women from history. And he says, oh, you mean women that never got credit for all the things they did? And I was like, yes. So I sensed it. So I sensed a small opening, and he started to share about a good friend of his pastor, who'd been showing him books about women from history, and he was really interested. And so I kind of started to loosen up, and we started chatting, and his name was Troy, and I finally said, Troy, I have to ask, I'm going to Devin Nunes' office. He says, oh yeah, that guy. No, I don't agree. And it was right before the first healthcare, the first round of healthcare. And I said, I got to ask, did you vote for Trump? And he said, yep. And so we started talking. He said he was disappointed in Trump. So we had this nice conversation. But he takes me, we finally got to the destination, and we're sitting in the truck, and we sat there for a little bit, and he goes, I have a hard time with the Republican Party right now. And out of the blue, he just starts talking about how he has decided that he supports abortion, and he goes, I've been thinking, and you know what, if I was a woman and I was pregnant and I was in that position, that'd be a really hard decision. He goes, I've just been thinking about it a lot lately. I've been really thinking, and I would have a really hard time. And I think that they should be able to choose. And I was like, okay, that's great, Troy. And then, and then he goes, out of the blue, he goes, and the other thing that really gets me, he says, is the stuff about the transgenders. The transgenders, and I was like, okay, yeah. And he says, it is hard enough in this world to find someone to love. Whose business is it who they love or what bathroom they want to use? And I was like, and I was like, is someone filming this? Is this? But it was, and so we took a selfie together and we shook hands. But one of the things he did say, and he talked. It was actually a way longer conversation than I'm relaying. But one of the things he said is, I was raised in a really conservative household. I was raised to think that gay people were bad. But, as an Uber driver, he says, I have so many conversations. I get to talk to so many kinds of people that I would never ordinarily meet. And I get to drive all these people around, and I've ended up meeting all kinds of people that I never would have talked to otherwise. So this is not a plug for Uber at all. But it was one of those, and for me, as someone born and bred in the liberal Bay Area, hippie parents and not a single conservative family member in sight, having conversations like that, where I had a real expectation going in, and I know that it, 199 times out of 100, it probably wouldn't go that way, but it was a conversation that stuck with me.
Yeah, I like that. God, I love the conversation about conversations, right? And one of the things that I remember after the election was that there was sort of this call to progressives to listen more to racist and misogynist people, you know? And it was like, this has happened because we have not been listening. And, you know, the thing that I just feel so strongly about is that that is bullshit. And that actually what needs to happen is that progressive people need to get into power and meet the needs of working class people and create policies that actually meet the needs of poor and working class people of all colors, because part of what's happening is there's the racism of the right wing and the extremists, right, which has been sort of brought more into the center. But there's also the racism of sort of the Democrats and the left, which is preoccupied with the emotions of angry, racist, sexist, working class white guys, and feels like that's a real thing that we need to be addressing. And it's not about addressing the symptom, which is like people's anger and misdirected anger at women, people of color, and undocumented folks. We need to actually address the source of the anger, which is the incredible mistreatment of all poor and working class people in this period of capitalism. And I have to say, the conversation that has been the most inspiring to me coming through a book, and Steve Phillips, I believe, is coming tomorrow to talk here at the festival, this book, Brown is the New White, in which he lays out all of the statistics that currently progressive whites and people of color constitute a new American majority that could win any election for the Democrats if the Democrats take more bold stances and more progressive stances around racial justice and class. And so that, like, anybody who's talked to me for 5 minutes has heard me mention this book, because I think that really, the struggle right now, the right wing has really caved to this vicious racism, but right now there's a huge struggle within the Democratic Party and the left to fight the ways that racism undermines our ability to have coalition and undermines our ability to build, beyond like a radical movement, even to build a moderate Democratic Party that can succeed. So I think that's sort of the conversation I'm in, is really a conversation about taking power and using it for good, as opposed to this sort of, I think, bullshit listening project of listening to people who have really been intentionally manipulated over decades to vote and act against their class self-interest. And it's not about their feelings, it's about figuring out how do we create a kind of justice that will shift those feelings.
I just want to say that I think, the part of the story that we have not and cannot possibly pay as much attention to as it needs is the voting suppression that is going on all over the country. And so there are huge structural catastrophes in our system. The idea that one man can decide we're pulling out of the Paris climate treaty being, the example that came up earlier. But it's system-wide. It's top to bottom. It's a little Russian nesting doll of corruption, yes, and evil, yes. Keep them coming. So yeah, what needs to change is everything, pretty much. Yeah.
So we are about to move towards questions from the audience. Before we do that, just a quick closing from you. The title of this book is Radical Hope. in his essay with that title in the book, Junot Diaz says that radical hope is our best weapon against despair, that it calls for imaginative excellence, to look beyond what we see as even possible or can understand for calibrating and bringing into being our future. So maybe we could start on that side this time, and if we could just go, each person could just briefly say one thing that has given you or is giving you radical hope.
Honestly, for me, it's the whole thing. I was raised basically an atheist and gave into, partially because of gender dysphoria, gave into a kind of toxic brand of nihilism when I was in high school. And then as an adult, I read a lot of Camus, and I got into existentialism. And so kind of the glory of that was the freedom to make my own meaning in life. Instead of saying life is meaningless, I get to make my own. And so something that, and I promise this isn't as flippant as it sounds, I, in a perverse way, appreciate the current historical moment because I don't even have to think hard to come up with a meaning or a purpose. It's so immediately there and vital and there's kind of a driving, fiery purpose in every moment now. There's something to be done that is bad for all of us, but kind of good for my spirit.
All right, thank you.
This is probably me saying the same thing slightly differently, that I feel that we just had an election in which everybody on the stage, for one reason or another, has been told that a large section of our country does not think we're important. And, there's just something in me that if you tell me to shut up, I'm not going to. If you don't tell me to, I might, but this is clearly not the moment in which to agree that our voices are unimportant in any way. And just one quick thing that did really surprise and hearten me was the spontaneous response at the airports to the Muslim ban. I expected the marches because they'd been planned and organized, and I knew they would happen. But that one was quite wonderful.
Very powerful. Yeah, thank you.
I thought the press was egregious during the election. I thought that they really gave Trump a leg up. I thought they really played to him. I thought they gave him many advantages. I thought they treated Hillary Clinton terribly. And I was quite depressed about the way the media behaved, especially as someone who spent a long, long, long time, many, many, many years of my life in the mainstream media. But since the election, I've just been absolutely floored, particularly by the Washington Post. They've been absolutely dogged, and I have a feeling that they are really in it for the long haul. They've been amazing. Vox has been amazing. The Nation always. I don't know how many of you here read In These Times, but In These Times has been kicking it for like the last 5 years, and in the last few months they've been even more amazing. Yeah. So I've really felt like the press has kind of woken up. You notice I didn't mention the New York Times, and that's for a reason. Yeah. They're just trying to play it both ways. I wish they didn't. Yeah. The editor's a friend of mine, and we occasionally exchange stuff, but it's just it's a disappointment to me. The New York Times could really be doing so much better. But all these other people are really kicking it. They're really doing amazing work. And
thank you.
The most amazing of all, hold it, Teen Vogue.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I have to say, as somebody who, like my whole life, has definitely been left of the Democratic Party, I've been really inspired by just sort of the groundswell of progressives who are like moving into the Democratic Party to try and move it to the left, and I've been inspired by, myself and others who were like too cool for that, like, oh, the Democrats. It's like, no, actually, it's time to get our hands on some power, and it's time to find the nearest institution that has some and to try and shift and bend it to a more progressive will, and seeing how close we're getting in some of those fights with Keith Ellison and Kimberly Ellis, and that I see that shifting. And that's not the answer, but that is a really crucial and inspiring next step.
Excellent, thank you.
I recently got an email with an invitation to contribute to another anthology, which is, I think, being published by the English publishers of Radical Hope. But it was from a young woman who I think was 18 years old, and she was editing an anthology about intersexual feminism. And I just thought, these kids, they're amazing. Yeah. They're amazing. I mean, I thought when I was 18, what was I doing? And I actually do. I agree with you. I do think the next generation is going to kick ass, and it's going to be. I mean, they're smart and they know what they're doing, and that has really given me hope. I mean, I think, and only the other thing that is that I'm still angry and I'm still in shock, and every day I'm angrier and every day I'm still and I feel like there's something. I feel like I'm so far from feeling that this is normal, and I don't think I'm ever going to feel like that's normal, and that gives me hope as well, because I think everybody around that I see feels the same way. So
that's right. Thank you.
I feel like we live in a magnificent moment. Everything is clear. It's very clear what truth is. And I know it's not, people try to make it seem like it's not clear what truth is, but truth is clear, and light is clear, and knowledge is clear, and compassion is clear, and the lack of those things, that's clear too. It's like, how can I say it? Forgive me the weak metaphor, but it's like when you sort of open the curtains and you see the house is real dirty. It's, and you roll up your sleeves and you're like, let's get down to cleaning. You're like, you got that joyful burst of energy because you know what needs to be done. That's the time we live in. It's a good time.
Word.
I think I would say, Jeff and I share this, but being in the sort of the belly of the beast of academia in Silicon Valley. But I think what it's really impressed me over the last few years is continuing to find students that don't believe in academia, that they know that is not the source of knowledge, that it is corporate, that it is not for their critical minds to really develop. I know this is a gross generalization, okay? But it is a generalization that I'm making so that those students, and I'm not saying me, one is making, so because when you put in their brains that Stanford doesn't know best, and they're there, and the courage to question the sources of knowledge that they're being given, and having the courage to even maybe just slightly turn their vision from the West and away from the West, to know that, and I'm saying it, that their own home knowledges, their indigenous knowledges, their working class backgrounds, all of this has information, access, knowledge that will help them change the world. Yes. And that gives me enormous courage, a confidence, hope, when I see they have the courage to do that even in front of the powers that be. That gives me a lot of hope.
I think what gives me radical hope is that we're the majority. And we've been talking a lot about electoral politics, but it's not just about the electoral majority. We're the cultural majority right now. And I think that all of the discussions that folks have been having, talking about they're having, and both of you talking about how Trump lays down the stakes, right? I think that more folks are becoming part of the majority every day. And we just need to be able to do that excellent imagining of what a cultural majority should be about, what should be looking like.
You all give me a ton of hope. You give me hope. All of you give me hope. a very concrete place to go find some hope, and this is really great in the next week, is a high school graduation. I went to one last night. I didn't even know anybody graduating. I was giving a talk. I was bawling. I felt so good. So go, like, even if you don't know a graduate, score a ticket and, like, go to one next week and just sit in the back row and just look at the faces of these young graduates who, despite the horror of the world, are so proud of themselves and who are so aware and awake and are just going to go out there and save the world for us.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. So we have time for just a little handful of questions, starting in the front, and then you'll be next. And is there a mic coming around?
We can hear you. You're right there.
They want a mic. All right, and I can repeat it.
As someone who comes from the world of fighting destructive corporate power and elected officials every day, activist and advocate, I just want to say, I've had to come to this over many, many years, but, my lasting, unshakable belief and reality now is that we will win in the end. And so I just want to say, all of you writers, lift up hope. You do that every day. You do that through your work and through your lives, because just from speaking personally, you heroically hold open the space for marginalized voices and for those realities and those truths to come forward. Carolina, you as well, the entire panel, all of you do that. So I just want to say that. And as my question, how do you kind of navigate the realities, and this is real as well, of the sort of negativity, the doubts of your own beliefs, of where this is going to go, where we're going to go as humanity through this administration and through time. How do you kind of deal with that and cope with that in your own lives and through your work?
I wonder if there's one person who's willing to jump in and bring it on that. Meredith, you're up.
With the caveat that astrology is fake, I'm an Aries, so I never really have any doubts that I'm wrong ever. But no, I think it's because I originally based all of my beliefs and moralities around the idea that human suffering should be minimized and space for human understanding and like growth and healing should be maximized. And then yes, of course. And the other animals. And I found ideologies that mapped closest to that. And so I think it's just that because I started from a place like I don't have religion in my life, so faith in the idea that humans and every other animal can and should be good to one another is, I guess to a certain extent, I've put it in a place in my heart of unshakable faith that I think other people might put God. And so I've managed to do a kind of a cognitive trick of making it unquestionable. And it's done me a lot of good so far.
Great, thank you. So there's a question down here in the middle of the third row.
I think with this election, more than any other, it feels like we've been separated, like, in Republican and Democrat in two different, like, echo chambers, to the point where we, like, have failed in understanding of, like, what the other side, like, the reality of the country and where people stand, per se. And I'm just wondering, in this age where, like, there's alternative facts, like, how do you fight, or, like, how do you converse with someone when there's indifference to what is actually going on, with Fox and with CNN? The country's being given two different narratives, and just to how to combat that, really. I agree with you with, like, not like the bullshit, like, listening project, but there is a thing and, like, a severity in watching politicians lie to you straight to your face and how to combat that.
Yeah. So Parnaz has dibs on this question.
I'd like to make a case for listening, with all due respect. I think listening is important. And the example I'll use is Troy, Kate's Troy. Troy, nobody put a leash and muzzle on him and forced him to enlightenment. You cannot force someone to enlightenment. They talked to Troy. They listened to Troy. Troy listened to them. There was dialogue and there was learning. And that is how Troy changed. This is important. Policy is important. Government is important. Change on a massive scale is important. But let's not forget we're dealing with human beings. Human beings like to talk and they like to be heard. And that's how change happens. That's how learning happens.
Okay, thank you. There's a question back here, and then the gentleman in the front on the end here will be next. Yes, and you may be the last question, I think.
Hi, thank you. You all on stage as writers, what you have to say really needs to be honored and cherished. And just like writers, comedians also have something to say and something to contribute. My question's regarding the recent controversy with Kathy Griffin. Do you think that what she did was really a true form of self-expression or inappropriate self-promotion? Because I personally, I'm pretty liberal. I'm very pro-Hillary and all that. But when I saw that picture with her with the decapitated head of Trump, I was disturbed, and I thought that a line was crossed. What are your thoughts?
Is there anyone who would like to jump in on that one?
I have a quick
Is there anyone who
statement.
hasn't had a question? Though I'm thrilled you have.
I'll take that one.
Okay, Achi.
I found the picture disgusting as well, but I think that's irrelevant. Because I think what's important is that she has something to say. And I do think she's being held to a double standard. I think that, Nugent and a number of other people on the right have said and done terrible things. During the time that Obama was president, the nooses, hell, there was a noose at the African American Museum last week, for God's sake. Another one today. Yeah, another one today, there we go. The characterizations were just as ugly, and the threats were just as ugly. And I do think she's a woman, she's 56 years old, she's in a field that's predominantly male, and she does this really intense thing, which apparently was more the idea of the photographer than hers anyway. And then she gets crucified, and she becomes the symbol of this over arching crap. She has the right to do that. She has the absolute right to make her point however she wants to make it. And I found the photo not appealing. I thought it was yeah, but I would defend her right every time. She should. It doesn't matter how we feel about it. She has a right to do it.
Thank you. So we have a question here in the front, and is this our last question, or do we have time for 2 more questions? One more. So you have the floor for the final word.
This one is for Jeff and anyone else who wants to follow him. What's up, Jeff? It's the 50th anniversary of the Summer of Love. Is there anyone out there, where is the music out there right now, if there is any, for compassionate resistance?
So Jeff, take us home.
Solange. Yeah? Solange and the other no sister, Beyonce. I think, especially Lemonade, that's all about reconciliation. It's all about truth and reconciliation, yeah? So.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you all so much. Thank you all for being here tonight, listening, being part of this conversation. I want to thank all of the authors. Let's give them another round of applause.
Carolina.
Let's give it up for Carolina, our editor.
Thank Carolina.
Thank you all so much. We're all going to keep keeping on, right? I've been asked to tell you that there are books for sale available in the lobby and available for signing, and authors will be available to sign your copies. So if you're interested in that, there it is. Have a good night and enjoy the rest of the festival. Thank you all so much.